set up real quick. So before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of things. One is just the technology setup. You can see on the slide the icons for the different buttons for your volume, your camera, your microphone. You are welcome to turn on your webcam and to enable your microphone so that when we have opportunities to participate, you can speak and do it that way. You're also welcome to leave your camera off if you would prefer. You can also participate by simply typing in the chat box that's in the bottom right-hand corner. So please feel free to do whichever option is more comfortable for you. If you do choose to speak, please use the hand raising icon. There are a bunch of people here, so if you would like to contribute, please just click on that hand raising icon and you will be called on. I want to mention that I'm very happy to have Shira Muraf here, who's our wonderful intern in the Programs and Education Department, and she is here to help out with any technical difficulties. So if you're having any trouble, please just let Shira know. You can start a private chat with her just by mousing over her name. She's in the presenters section, or just type what's happening in the general chat box, and Shira will be right there to assist you. So thank you, Shira. So many of you are probably familiar with the Jewish Women's Archive already, but I'll just give a little bit of introduction for anyone who isn't familiar with us. JWA is a national nonprofit that's dedicated to making known the stories, struggles, and achievements of Jewish women. And on our site, you'll find the world's largest repository of material and voices of Jewish women. You can see our mission here. JWA documents Jewish women's stories, elevates their voices, and inspires them to be agents of change. So it's not just about collecting these stories, but about promoting them and demonstrating their value and making them accessible to the general public. And we have a lot of resources and a lot of ways that we do that. We have thousands of profiles of different women across time and space and geographic location. We have an encyclopedia, curricula for educators. We also have a blog, a podcast, a book club. So lots of ways to get involved in Jewish women's stories. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our program for today. Again, I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here. I am very excited to introduce Julie, who is a Torah Scribe and Educator. She lives in the Hudson Valley, New York. She is one of the first women known to have written a Torah, and she wrote her first Torah as part of an exhibit at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, which I know she's going to talk about a little bit more later. She lectures and runs workshops all over the country about Torah writing and related subjects, and she's also working on a memoir. So she basically just has a lot going on and is doing many, many cool things. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you, Julie, if there's anything else you want to say in terms of introduction, and then go ahead and get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Larissa, and thank you to the Jewish Women's Archive for this opportunity, and thank you to all the participants for taking time out of your day to be here and learn about women who write sacred texts. So this picture is from when I wrote that first Torah at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco. I started learning the art of the scribal arts, or safrut stam, and I'll talk about what safrut stam is in just a moment. I started learning when I was 31. My background had been in Jewish education. I always loved the Hebrew letters. And one day I thought, wouldn't it be fun to just know how to write them in that pretty calligraphy? And as things happen sometimes, this dominoed And before I knew it, I was invited to write a Torah. I actually didn't know when I first started learning that women were so underrepresented in this field. And people often ask me, so when did they let women start writing Torahs? And the answer is that nobody let women start writing Torahs. Some women decided that we also wanted to have a part in transmitting the major text of our tradition to the generations to come. And that's how it happened. And it's really starting right now, meaning it's a very, very new thing. So we're actually going to start with a little exercise, and Larissa's going to lead this, and I'll take us to our first slide.
Perfect. Thanks, Julie. So those of you who attended our Visual Thinking Strategies webinar in 2015, if anyone was there for that program, you're going to know what this is. And if not, don't worry, you'll catch on very quickly. So Julie has presented us with an image, and we are not going to give you any information about this image. We just want you to take a minute to look at it, take it in, notice things, kind of start to think about what you're seeing and what's happening in this image. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and please feel free to either just type your responses into the chat box, or feel free to raise your hand if you would like to give a verbal response. So as you take a look at this image, the first question I have for you is simply, what's going on in this image? And the question to go along with that is, what do you see that makes you say that? So we want you to share, what you see, what do you think is going on, but also give the visual evidence to back up what you're saying. Okay. So again, the two questions are, what's going on in this image, and what do you see that makes you say that? So feel free to take a minute to look at it, and then whenever you're ready, either type in the chat box or go ahead and raise your hand. So Anne said a right-handed person touching the lettering. Great. And Anne, if you could follow up with what you see that makes you say that. Kara said, I noticed that the letters are not shaded in fully, and this person appears to be filling in the word tzedek. Okay, so Kara's bringing in her knowledge of Hebrew to help figure out what's going on here. Alana said, purple nail polish, exclamation point. Yeah. Kara notices that this person is wearing an awesome color, so a couple of people are noticing the nail polish. So Anne is letting us know, giving us her visual evidence. The position of the thumb tells us that it's the right hand. Great. What more can we find? Sarah says, I noticed this is not the traditional utensil used to write a Sefer Torah. You think, okay, so maybe bringing in some knowledge of scribal arts. And Anne said, hands by themselves have no gender. An interesting insight. Sarah notices the four-letter name of God. So again, bringing in knowledge of Hebrew to help figure out what's going on in this image. Maybe we'll take a few more responses, and then we'll move on. Sarah says, this is the line, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue, which ties into the notion Julie just described about women scribes. Great, excellent. So again, bringing in some background knowledge and tying it into our content for today. Oh, can people hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Anne said, in our society, purple nail polish suggests a gender identification of female. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Kara. I'm glad you can hear me now. Okay, wonderful. So I think thank you all so much for participating, for these great insights. So I guess now I'll hand it back over to Julie to maybe tell us a little bit about this.
Okay, so I loved hearing your comments. I do happen to know what this picture is because I was there, and this is my hand. I love the comment. I can't remember who made it. The person that said hands have no gender, right? Purple nail polish hands have no gender, and similarly, a Torah has no gender. But this does happen to be me, and I was fixing a Torah. I was fixing a Torah because, as you can see, as someone pointed out, there's kind of scratches in the ink. Some of the letters have started to fade, or the ink has started to crack, and I'm fixing it. I'm writing it over. I'm re-inking some of the words, and the words that I'm on are, as also can't remember who said it, but it is tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you will pursue. The instrument that I'm writing is actually the traditional instrument used to write a Torah. It might not look that way from this angle and from this up close, but it's a feather. It's a turkey feather, and we're going to go more into details about the materials in just a moment. So I will take us to the next slide. I just have this because this I think is possibly the image that a lot of people have, or something similar to it when they think of a scribe. If you'll notice, the person that noticed that it was a right-handed person writing the last one, you'll notice this person is left-handed. It's fine to be either right-handed or left-handed, although there is a rule that if you're right-handed, you must write with your right hand, and if you're left-handed, you must write with your left hand, as you're supposed to write with your good hand. Interestingly, if you're ambidextrous, you are supposed to write with your right hand, which there is some kind of favoring of the right hand. But clearly the scribe is left-handed, and so is one of the best and most well-known Hebrew calligraphers in the world, Izzy Plodwinski, is also left-handed. Okay, so I am a soferet stam. Soferet is a Hebrew word. It means writer. I'm not just any writer. Sofer or soferet, which is the feminine form of the word, can refer to an author, someone who writes books. But of course, I'm not coming up with the words myself when I'm writing the book of the Torah. I am copying words. And the particular terminology that's used for someone who writes the sacred text is a stam, and it's an acronym. In Hebrew, the letters are samech, tav, and mem. I'll get this handy dandy. This is the samech. I'm circling it on the screen. And the samech stands for Sefer Torah. That's one of the objects, one of the sacred pieces of sacred writing that a sofer is trained to write. And the tav, the T of stam, is tefillin. And tefillin, as many of you may already know, are small leather boxes that are wrapped around the arm and the head. And inside these boxes are pieces of parchment with handwritten verses, sections from the Torah written inside of them. Does anyone want to guess what the M stands for? Or maybe you know already. Okay, so we got two simultaneous responses. Mezuzah, Megillah. and both are correct. The mem covers both the mezuzah and the Megillah. The mezuzah is over here on the right, and it contains passages also from the Torah, which are essentially the first two paragraphs of the Shema prayer. The Megillah, which literally means scroll, it refers in this case to Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, which is chanted from on Purim. And it's the only Megillah of all of the other Megillot, all of the other scrolls, that actually has the rule that it has to be chanted from a scroll. So usually it's the only one that's written on a scroll, as opposed to Megillat Ruth, the book of Ruth, or the scroll of Ruth. Sometimes it would be written on a scroll for the beauty of it, but it doesn't have to be written on a scroll according to tradition in order to read from it or chant from it in synagogue. Does that make sense? Are there any questions up to this point? I wanted to say that I'm happy to take questions as I go, because I often forget to address things. So if you have a question on anything that I'm talking about now, please feel free to ask it. Okay. So we are getting to the material section. Torah and the other stam objects, the mezuzah and the Megillah, are written on parchment. In Hebrew, this is called cloth. And cloth is made from the skin of a kosher animal. So this is primarily from 4 different types of animals. I'll tell you the first 3, and then I'm going to have you guess the 4th, because the 4th is somewhat challenging. So most new Torahs, or at least many new Torahs today, are written on cow skin, simply because there are a lot of cows right now in our world. But in the past, they've also, and still are to some extent, been written on goat skin, as well as sheep skin, as well as, and this is the 4th that I'm going to ask if anybody knows or wants to guess, what another kosher and large enough land animal. Yes, Anne, you got it correct. Deer. Sometimes people don't think of deer as a kosher animal because it will often be hunted, and hunting is not considered kosher for eating food. It would have to be slaughtered, shechted in a certain manner in order for it to be considered kosher to eat. However, interestingly, in order to be considered kosher for the parchment, it just has to have been a potentially kosher animal. It has to be a kosher type of animal, but it can have died in any manner. It could have been slaughtered for food. It could have been slaughtered in a kosher manner. It could have been slaughtered in a non-kosher manner, such as hunting. It could have just died of its own accord. I think this is the most ideal way to make cloth, because the animal had died anyway. And by the way, it's not permitted to kill an animal in order specifically to use the skin to make sacred writings. It has to have been either dead already or been killed for a different use, which I think is interesting. So those are the animals. Also, in terms of making the parchment, it's kind of like the tanning process, like making leather. It differs somewhat. And before even soaking the skins in lime to clean it off, to clean off the skin, the person who's preparing the parchment has to set an intention out loud. And they say, I am preparing these skins for use in sacred writings. And if they don't make that statement, that intention, in Hebrew kavanah, the skins and the parchment will not be considered kosher. And kavanah, intention, plays a role in all aspects of the writing process, everywhere from the parchment making to the scribe writing every single word. So pictured here is a few things. On the top right, the smallest image, this is actually the back of a mezuzah. And I chose this picture so that people could see the coloring of the parchment. I think people often think of parchment as white. You know, there's this idea of Torah being black fire on white fire, black ink on white parchment. But parchment is not always white. Sometimes it's white, but it's often spotted. The color will not be as dark as, for example, the spotted cow. If the cow had black spots, it won't be black, but it will be brown. And it will be a little bit faded, but you can still definitely tell the coloring of the animal from the parchment. On the bottom right is the picture of a stretcher. This is an image from when a bunch of us women scribes got together in Toronto. There aren't that many of us, so we all know each other. There's starting to be more, but at least at a certain point in time, we would joke that there was a minion of women scribes, 10 of us. There are probably at this point 15 at least, and more learning. But we had a somewhat of a convention, and a colleague, Linda Motskin, makes her own parchment from skins of local deer hunters in Saratoga Springs, New York. And she brought all of the equipment, and we were sort of doing one of the last steps of the parchment making together, which is stretching out the skin. On the left, this is Meir, and he operates, along with the rest of his family, a store in Jerusalem called Klaf Bak. And this is where I buy most of my supplies. This is also where most of the women who do this work that I know buy their supplies, because not all of the stores will sell to women. They know that we are doing the writing. And while they personally would not use these objects, they wouldn't hang a mezuzah that I wrote on their door. But they don't see it as, they don't feel that they need to stop someone else from doing that. Whereas some of the people do feel like it's their obligation to prevent women from writing.
Julie, we do have a couple of questions if you want to address those. Maradan had asked, she was asking about the statement you made about the kavanah statement, and if that has to be made in front of witnesses.
No, the kavanah statement does not need to be made in front of witnesses. None of the kavanah statements need to be made in front of witnesses. It's really, it's honor, what do you call it? Scout's honor.
Great. And Kara also had a question about if there's a discussion as to why an animal isn't killed for the purpose of sacred text.
I don't remember exactly, but I do remember learning that there's an idea to distance death from Torah, which is called the source of life. So as much as we can kind of distance it or separate it out, I think that is the reason. And yes, there are discussions of these materials that go as far back as the Talmud and earlier. Any other questions? Were there? No. Okay. So we get to the quill. Currently, the quill, usually it's made from a turkey feather, is the instrument of choice, but it was not the most ancient instrument used. The most ancient instrument used was a reed. And of course, the instrument that is used depends on what is available to the scribe who's doing the writing. So someone who lives close to the river where there are reeds growing, he would use a reed. But if you are in landlocked Europe, you probably started using feathers. And feathers has become the most common these days. And on the left, you can see the edge. This is the edge of the turkey feather. It no longer really looks like a turkey feather, at least not that edge of it. It's cut. It's hollow in the inside, and the scribe has to cut it, shape it to function like a pen. You can also see, and I'll use the pointer here, this slit going down the middle of the pen. That's made with a razor blade, and the idea is that it functions as an ink channel. So when you dip the feather in the ink, the channel holds that ink. So if any of you are calligraphers, you know how this works, and of course the slit has to be just so that it can hold enough ink, but not too much ink, or else you will have that technical term of an ink blob on your Torah. So you don't want too much, but you want enough that you can write a couple of words in a row. This, by the way, cutting the quill was the hardest thing to learn of any of the technical elements of the scribal arts. It's very difficult. As for the ink, there are no set ingredients that the ink has to be, but it's generally what is called gallnut ink, or iron gall ink, made from gallnut. And what a gallnut is that it occurs on certain types of trees. A wasp will lay its eggs on the tree, and the tree will respond by forming this kind of bulb around it. And basically what is left afterwards, there's kind of a soot from where the wasp larvae have been, and that is combined with iron oxide, and the chemical process makes it a very, very black ink. So it's some people are surprised to hear that that Torah ink is made from wasp larva residue. But this is the case, and all of the materials really are coming from the natural world. Ink cannot have a non-kosher ink substance in it. So, for example, it can't have squid ink, it can't have octopus ink, and also the other rule for the ink is that it has to be black, and it has to stay black. If the ink starts to turn a different color, it means that retroactively it was not kosher to begin with. So the ink it's very difficult to make. It's even harder to make than the parchment. And I've never attempted the ink, nor have I attempted the parchment. It's something you need a lot of outdoor space for. I would joke with people that I wasn't, when I was writing the Torah in California, that I was not hanging deer skin in my San Francisco apartment because of sort of the obvious reasons. But the ink, again, is quite hard to make. There are a few companies that make ink in Israel. They do not list their ingredients. They may have wine in them. They may have pomegranate juice. They probably have some kind of vinegar. They have something to make it viscous, to make it thicker, or something to make it thinner. The gum arabic is what makes it thick often, and you can buy the inks at different thickness levels per your preference. Okay, so we talked a little bit about intention and Hebrew kavanah. And kavanah is something that goes into every moment of sacred writing. It's actually said, as I mentioned, by the person making the parchment, and it's also said by the scribe at the start of anything that he or she is going to write. So, for example, if I'm going to write a mezuzah, I begin the process by saying, I am writing this mezuzah for the sake of the holy mezuzah. I say it in Hebrew. Areini ani kotevet l'shem kedushat mezuzah. And it sets an intention, but it must be out loud. And it only has to be said once. So, for example, with a Sefer Torah, which of course takes many more sittings than a single sitting, I only have to say it once in the beginning before I start. I certainly can say it whenever I want, and I do often repeat it to remind myself and to help set my intention on the Torah. but in terms of the technical halacha, the law, the rule about it, it only has to be said once. Now, I have on this image the Hebrew word Elohim. And the reason I have the Hebrew word Elohim is because the word itself has multiple meanings in the Torah. In the Torah, there's 10 different names for God. There's Elohim, there's Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, there is Shaddai, there's Adonai, there's the 4-letter name of God, Yod He Vav He. And each of these names of God also is preceded by an intention that the scribe says out loud before writing the name of God. So they say, I am writing for the sake of God's holy name. Now, this word Elohim sometimes means God, but sometimes it means gods, as in other gods. Like, for example, we will listen to your God. You will not go and listen to the other gods. In Hebrew, it's the same word. So, of course, only the one that is referring to God has to be get a special intention. And if the one that's not referring to God gets a special intention, that's actually a problem. So there is this idea that something happens in the Torah on a spiritual level, nothing that you can see by reading the words, but that it shifts, it changes what's happening inside the Torah if the scribe has set this special intention or not. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes the word God is in question. That is, not everyone agrees, is it a name of God or is it not a name of God? So a good example is the phrase Beit Elohim, the house of God, or a place, Beit El, which is the name of a location, the house of God. Is the word in that context El, is that a name of God or is that not a name of God? So then the rule is you make a qualifying statement and you say, if this is the name of God, then I'm sanctifying it. But if it's not, then I'm not, which is kind of funny. Okay. So each and every letter in the Torah is considered important in and of itself. And what that means is that there are multiple different spellings of words. And even if we know what the word is supposed to say when we're reading it, if it's missing one of those letters, still the Torah is not considered kosher. And I'm bringing this slide as an example that explains this importance that the tradition places on the letters themselves. So we are looking at the first verse of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Hebrew, we have the word et, which signifies a direct object. It doesn't have any direct translation. So the verse reads, in the beginning, God created et, the heavens and the earth. And the rabbis looked at this and said that the et signifies the alphabet, from the first letter of the alphabet to the last letter of the alphabet, from the aleph to the taf. So in the beginning, God created the Hebrew alphabet. And then through the alphabet, the heavens and the earth emerged. And the other thing I wanted to share about this verse is another midrash, another interpretation. The very first, if we take the first letter of each word in this first verse, and we add up their numerical value. So this is something called gematria, which some of you I'm sure are familiar with, where each letter has a numerical equivalent. The aleph, because it's the first letter, equals 1. The bet, because it's the second letter, equals 2, and so on. So if we add up everything that's in purple, basically, the first letter of every word here, who's good at math? How many, what do we, if we add it up, the bet, which is 2, another bet, which is 2, we have aleph, which is 1, Aleph 1, Hey 5, Vav 6, Hey 5. $18 is close. 23 is also close. 4, 5, 6, 11. We're nearing it. It's 22. 2, I hope I'm doing the math right. It's 22. And yes, Kara got it. 22 letters. And there 22 is important because there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. The Hebrew alphabet has 22 base letters. It also has the final forms of other letters. So there are 27 forms of letters, but 22 base letters. And here they are, pictured. This script is called Ashurit script. And all the sacred writings are written in what's called Ashurit script. Now, what's depicted here is just one style of Ashurit script. There are many, many different styles. And you could see one and think, wow, this doesn't even look like the same script, but it is considered the same script. So you'll see a rounder kind of more, and the Sephardi writing is more rounded. This is very sharp. You also have multiple versions of this. I won't go into the details of how they differ, but this is the script that all sacred writings are written in. Now, interestingly enough, this script did not come into being until after the Torah was given, but that's another discussion for another time. We'll see if we get to that at the end. So some of the rules with writing is that the letters, because each and every letter is important, none of the letters can touch each other. However, they are supposed to be a hair's breadth apart, so very, very close. There's also sometimes not just the letter itself, but the letter's airspace. So here we have the final chaf, which I'm circling. And even though all of this part here is the parchment, it is considered the personal airspace of the final chaf. So below here was the lamed, and the lamed is not allowed to jut up into this space of the final chaf. That would be as if they were touching.
Julie, we had a question. I think this was from the previous slide, but what does
Assyrian so it is based on a place called Ashur, like Assyrian. It's based on that. Yeah. Okay. So the Torah and also Megillah and Mezuzah has no punctuation, no trope signs for how to chant it, no points, no nikudot, no vowels, but it does have tagim, these crowns that are on the top of 7 letters. And always when these letters appear, whether in their regular or their final form, there will be 3 crowns on them. And I'll tell a quick story from the Talmud about these crowns. The story goes that Rabbi Akiva, from the time of the Mishnah, which is something like 1,000 years, say, after the time of Mount Sinai and the receiving of the Torah, as the story goes, Rabbi Akiva is teaching, and God had sent Moses into Rabbi Akiva's classroom to learn something about the tagim, the crowns. Because Moshe is receiving the Torah or writing down the Torah, and from the perspective of the scribe, I can only imagine, he asks, why do we need these crowns? The subtext being, it would take me a lot shorter time if I could just write the letters. It takes a long time to make all of these little crowns. What's their meaning? So God had sent Moses to Rabbi Akiva's Beit Midrash, place of learning, and he's sitting in the back row because he doesn't understand anything that Rabbi Akiva is saying. But then Rabbi Akiva says, and this law whatever he had been explaining. I get this law based on the crown on this letter. So Moses felt better. He said he understood that even if he didn't understand it at the time, that every little sign in the Torah had meaning, and that over the course of time it would become revealed. So I like to think of the crowns as this ongoing revelation, that it's all kind of there, and we can continue interpreting it through the ages. This is a picture of one sheet, what's called Yeriah of Torah. There are, generally speaking, when new Torahs are made today, there's a certain pagination format. Not always, but often. It's part of globalization. So there are 62 sheets in this kind of standard version of a Torah, and this is one sheet, and the sheet has 42 lines per column and four columns per sheet. And as you can see, the columns are perfectly aligned. And if you went closer, you would also see you do not have a word that has a part of the word and then a dash, and then you finish the word on the next line. That's not allowed. So sometimes you will see stretched letters in the Torah or squished letters in the Torah. And these do not have spiritual significance for the most part. It was just the scribe trying to align the letters with the columns. Okay. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this. These are some special sections in the Torah. On the left, I've numbered them. So number 1 is Shirat Hayam, the crossing of the sea. And some people say that the visual image of how the words are arranged looks like it's the people, the Israelites, walking through the sea when the water is to their right and to their left. Because this is the song that they sang as they were crossing or had finished crossing the sea. Number 2 is an example of an enlarged letter, a special big letter in the Torah. There's a bunch of these in the Torah, not a ton, but there are maybe 20 of them. And a good example of enlarged letters is the Ayin and the Daled in the Shema. So you'll see it also in prayer books. They often keep that those enlarged letters. Number 3, there are, I believe, 11 different occasions in which you see dots on top of some letters in the Torah. And they're very mysterious, and nobody knows why they're there. One of my teachers thinks it's because sometimes if you flick the pen in a certain way, it will drop a dot of ink, and he thinks at some point a scribe did that by accident, and then the next one copied it over, and that's how we ended up with the dots. But some people have more spiritual associations with it. Number 4 is what's called the backwards nuns, and it's a famous passage in between these backwards nuns. But for the most part, the Torah is column after column, blocks of text, but there are these special sections. Okay, and I see there are a few questions. Yeah, the number of lines per column, it can be different from Torah to Torah. It's often these days 42 lines per column. It can be as many as 60. And are the same words or letters always squished or elongated? No. It will depend on the scribe, and when they notice that they needed more space or less space, they can elongate whatever they want of the permissible letters that you can elongate. So for example, certain letters, if you elongate them, they will no longer look like that letter. So you can't really elongate an aleph because it won't look like an aleph anymore, or it's much harder to elongate an aleph. So there are certain letters that you can elongate, but not certain letters, certain specific letters of that line or passage. Okay, so scoring. You might not have known this even if you've looked inside of a Torah, but all Torahs are scored. They all have lines etched in them. It is one of the halachot, one of the rules. And they have a top line. So the idea is that the scribe follows the top line and writes a letter that goes halfway down from the line to the next line. And a standard size of Torah is 8 millimeters between each line. So each letter will be less than 4 millimeters high. The thing pictured here is for tefillin parchment, which is even smaller than Torah, generally speaking. So this is a case where the letters will be less than 2 millimeters high, which is quite small. Okay, so this is a picture of what I'm copying from. It's called a tikkun for sofrim, and it's not permitted for a scribe to work from memory, even if they know the passage very well from their bat mitzvah or whatever. You have to be copying from a written, either a written scroll or a scanned copy. This is actually a scanned copy of a handwritten scroll. The pages are sewn together. I remember the first time that I poked holes in a Torah. It was very shocking, but this is what has to be done in order to sew the pieces together. The holes, of course, are not poked in the words. They're poked at the edges of the parchment. And the gidin is made from the sinew of a kosher animal, from different parts of the inside ligament, tendon. And it's very strong. It's also, of course, from an animal. So again, this theme of natural materials. Mistakes happen. They happen pretty often. And one of the most prevailing myths of Torah writing is that if you make a mistake, you have to start the whole thing over. It's not true. First of all, the Torah is in pieces, right? I mean, the Torah is very long, and even though cows are huge, there is no cow that is long enough to write an entire Torah on, unless you're writing really, really small. So the worst possible scenario is that you would have to write an entire sheet over. But most of the time you can fix the mistake. And you fix the mistake using a blade, scratching off the dry ink of the incorrect letter, for example, and then rewriting the correct letter on the parchment, which is layered. So some mistakes can't be fixed. If you make a mistake with the name of God, sometimes it can be fixed, sometimes it cannot be fixed, because there's a principle that you can't erase the name of God, that the way that you can erase any other word. Now, another example of something that you can't really fix is, let's say you were writing a column and you get to the end and you realize, oops, I skipped a whole line somewhere in there. This is exactly what happened to one of the scribes of the St. John's Bible. This was a project from not too long ago, where 10 scribes were hired to illuminate and write the entire Bible, Old and New Testament, in English. And the scribe did just that, skipped a line by accident. And what she did to fix it is that she added the line at the bottom and then drew a little birdie, and the beak is kind of pointing into the spot where the line is supposed to be. Now, this is very clever, but for a Torah, it's not permitted. First of all, the pictures are not permitted. And also, you couldn't put the line underneath. You could put a word on top, kind of in between the lines. You could, what's called hanging a word, if you forgot a word. But if you did this in a Torah, you can't really scratch off an entire column, so you would just rewrite that page. Okay, so we're getting close. We don't have much time left, but I do want to address the rules about women writing. This is a picture of me writing at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco. And the reason that women, in terms of the halacha, the Jewish law, the reason that women don't write is connected to obligation to wear tefillin. So the rabbis reasoned that because women are not obligated to lay tefillin, Likewise, they don't write tefillin. And since the verse about tefillin is adjacent in the Torah to the verse about mezuzah, they also don't write mezuzah. And now we have a category of women writing, so they also don't write Torah. Now, I want to point out they could have started from mezuzah and said, since women are obligated to hang a mezuzah, they also write mezuzah. And since the verse about mezuzah is next to the verse about tefillin, they also write tefillin, and therefore women write everything. But this is not the direction it went in. And also, even rabbis from a long time ago recognized the tension of having a mitzvah. Writing a Sefer Torah is one of the 613 mitzvahs. It's actually the 613th to write a Sefer Torah obligation. And there's no reason that women shouldn't be obligated in this mitzvah. So this rabbi was sort of asking in a very long response of, well, how do we deal with this? A woman seems to be obligated to write a Torah. However, if she writes a Torah, that Torah is not considered kosher. And he doesn't really come up with a good solution, but he's aware of the tension and the problem. By the way, Megillat Esther is much more ambiguous. Women are specifically obligated to hear the Megillah. And even in the text of the Megillah, it says, and Esther wrote this down, right? So we can't really say women weren't writing it. So technically speaking, the issue of women writing Megillot is much more of an open question, and sort of more progressive Orthodox communities would accept a Megillah written by a woman. But nobody would accept a Torah written by a robot. This is a picture of a robot writing a Torah in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. They acknowledged that it would not be a kosher Torah. It took the robot, I think, 3 months, maybe 4 months to complete the Torah. It takes a person a year at least. Some people can do it faster. I certainly can't. But, you know, hearing about this robot made me think how unique, as we have it, as it stands, how unique each Torah is, because handwriting is as individual as a fingerprint. And even if I tried, I couldn't replicate someone else's writing. So each and every Torah is a unique and infused with spirit from a human being, whereas something that is machine made or printed or mechanical doesn't have that same kind of feel to it. So I think that that's probably all we have time for, unless there are some questions. And I know that there's a wrap up. I do want to give people the opportunity to ask questions. I'll put the final slide up on the screen, and if folks were interested and we had time, we could talk about these different scripts. But I do want to make sure that I answer any other questions that were raised, or if more questions came up.
So yeah, if anyone has some last minute questions, that you feel free to type those in the box now. We do have one question from Rachel. She asked if a mistake can be scratched off. What does that mean about the durability of the lettering on the scroll?
The lettering in the scroll does fade or scratch off. Now, it really depends how it is taken care of and how much it is exposed to the elements, right? So we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were rolled up and not opened for thousands of years, and they're still legible. But if it's a Torah that is getting read from a lot, then yes, over time it will fade, and it will need to be fixed, updated, or a new scroll would be written, and that scroll potentially would get buried in what's called a geniza, because you wouldn't just throw away the Torah. It would have a special way of saying goodbye to it. Interestingly enough, in working on fixing Torahs, there's always one section that is in the worst shape, and that section is the section that's read on Rosh Chodesh, in the new month, because it's read so much more frequently than all of the other sections. Most sections are only read once a year or maybe twice a year, but simply by being opened up every month to that spot, it fades more quickly.
I think we might only have time to answer one more question out loud, but then maybe while I'm doing announcements, maybe Julie, you could respond in the chat box to the other questions that have come in. So Kara asked if you can share a moment when you've been confronted by an observant person who had an issue with your role as a Sopheret and how you navigate things like that.
There's only really one time that I've been confronted in person, and that was when I was trying to buy supplies at a store in Jerusalem. I actually had brought in my grandfather's to fill in, and I basically wanted to look inside, and he sensed, and he said, "Who's your teacher? Is he teaching you?" Because there's a teacher who's Orthodox in Jerusalem who teaches women, and rumor had gotten around, and then he refused to sell me. I think I was trying to buy Gidin. He refused to sell it to me. But other than that, I haven't face to face received any negativity. I definitely know people and have friends who wouldn't use something I wrote because they're Orthodox, but they don't confront me and say, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this," and often they support it. But sort of because of their affiliations and associations would, or maybe even personal beliefs, they wouldn't use it themselves.
Great. Julie, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. Before I officially wrap this up, I have a couple of announcements, and I have a feeling I'm going to go over by a minute or two. So if you have to leave, that's fine. I want to be respectful of your time, but I will go as quickly as I can. You can learn more about Julie by visiting her website, julieseltzer.net. You can feel free to click on this link. It'll just open in a new tab. You won't get kicked out of the room. A couple of JWA announcements. We are currently accepting applications for our annual education award, the Natalia Tversky Educator Award. So if you're an educator working with students in grades 5 through 12 and you're using primary sources to bring the stories of Jewish women into your classroom, you might be our next Tversky winner. So you can learn more on our website. Again, you can click on any of these links and they will open in a new tab. You can also nominate an educator. So if you know someone who you think fits this description, please feel free to nominate them for the Tversky Award. We are also accepting applications for our Teen Fellowship program, the Rising Voices Fellowship. This is a program for young women in grades 10 through 12, so female-identified Jewish teens who are strong writers and who are passionate about Judaism, feminism, and social justice. So if you know of any teens who might be interested in our program, please feel free to pass this information along. Applications are due by March 28th. We also have an exciting Purim campaign this year. We're partnering with the Jewish Multiracial Network and Repair the World to share stories of Jewish women of color who are doing really important work to strengthen and preserve Jewish community. So you can send these cool cards that have pictures of them and descriptions of the work that they're doing. You can send those cards to your family, to your friends. And also as part of that, JWA is starting a new archive to collect stories of Jewish women of color and Mizrahi and Sephardi women. So definitely check that out as well on our site. And if you get our mailings, you'll definitely be seeing more about that. Finally, we really appreciate your participation in this program, and we would love for you to fill out a brief survey. Again, you can click on this link, it'll open right away, so you can do it right now, to just tell us what you thought of the program today. Your feedback is very valuable to us. We take it